Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. I am still searching for Gen AI's value to AppSec and whether it can handle the kind of security reviews that humans do. For example, there once was an LLM created for the purpose of having code rated. It looked at some C, saw so much malloc and free, and now we have to have it sedated. Which means this week we chat with Dan Moore about development environments, developer experience, and dev collaboration with security. Push to main and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
This is episode 319, recorded February 24th, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John. It's been a while.
I am here. It feels like it's been forever, but, oh, wait, let's see. Hang on. There was one thing. I was supposed to show palms out to show that I'm being engaging and...
Thank you for the screenshot. You're always engaging, John. And you can bring that engagement to Identiverse 2025 if you so like. It's returning to Las Vegas June 3rd through 6th. You can hear from over 251 if John is there, expert speakers, and connect with more than 3,000 identity security professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends. Take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new Non-Human Identity Pavilion, which sounds like a trap. I don't know. I've been watching too much Severance, maybe. Register now and save 25% with code IDV25-SecurityWeekly at securityweekly.com/IDV2025. And with that out of the way, let's talk to Dan Moore, who's a principal product engineer for FusionAuth and currently helps build solutions and educates developers about Auth, I think Auth-N and Auth-Z, and OAuth. He's written, contributed to, or edited 5 books, including Letters to a New Developer and 97 Things Every Cloud Engineer Should Know. As a former CTO, technical trainer, and engineering manager, and longtime developer, Dan has been writing software for over 25 years. Hello, Dan. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you back. In fact, we've talked with you a few times, and I've got to ask you: you've been writing code for 25 years. What's the last code you wrote within the last month or so? And how many bugs did it have?
I actually been writing a fair bit of SQL because I'm working on like some analytics, internal analytics for our company right now, which has been super fun because speaking of AI, like AI and SQL are like a match made in heaven as far as I'm concerned, because there's all kinds of fiddly bits, but if you know the general question you want to ask and you know the data, you can check the answers pretty easily. And so I've been writing a fair bit of that.
Figuring out those joins and those where clauses, yeah. But I think I wanted to, as I alluded to, or as I said straight up in the intro, wanted to talk about dev environments and dev experience, because one of the things as we were chatting off, you brought to me and mentioned was a bit of a trend towards local first development. And I wanted to get we should probably define what we mean by that. But sure. Some of the subtext of it felt like there was falling out of favor with cloud development, but more from a developer experience perspective, more from how do I just build faster? So tell us a little bit about local first. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so I think that local first is a trend I've seen more and more of as I talk to developers. And I think that some of it is a recognition that cloud is an amazing place to deploy to in production, but doing local dev against a cloud environment has trade-offs, right? It's got latency in terms of network connectivity. It's got a lack of isolation because you oftentimes are sharing a cloud SaaS instance with other developers, or you have things that are locked down or it costs money. And then there's a performance aspect as well. And so when we talk about local first development, I want to be super clear that we're not talking about everything. There are certain things that are just better suited for SaaS. But if you're talking about like real hardcore dev architectural components, a message queue, a database, an auth system, which is something near and dear to my heart. But those kind of components that are snapped into build your application can be problematic or tougher to develop with when you're using a SaaS solution as opposed to something that you can run in a Docker container or an RPM or a deb, and then possibly deploy in an environment you control, or possibly deploy up to a SaaS provider.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things I want to unpack from this. And one, my first thought is local. Well, are we bringing back thick clients, or is the computer now the network rather than the network is the computer? To coin the old marketing. But there's one idea. Why not bring more of the dev just purely into the cloud for the latency? But I think another thing there is there's also cloud, and you mentioned SaaS, and we live in a world where organizations might have a few hundred, if not on the order of 1,000 different SaaS providers they're integrating with, they're using for some reason. And that gets complex. I'll throw in there too, not just the latency, but with my security hat on, just credentials, secrets management. So there's a lot of concerns here that come to my mind as you start to say this, while I still have to acknowledge developers, they're worried about latency. They want it to be easy. They want it to be fast. And that's what it seems like there's the push here. But if I start to maybe let's play choose your own adventure. But between those angles of like thick versus thin client, or SaaS or secrets, is there any of those that you don't hear about perhaps from the developers? Because I don't want to say developers don't care about security, but there may be some things that isn't as high priority.
I mean, I think that like security is always a concern for mature devs, right? Yeah. And having that in the back of their mind someplace. At the same time, they are paid to get the job done. And so I think that local first development can actually help with that, with both those, right? Because you're isolated to a local box, and the developer has kind of ultimate control over it. Although, in most modern environments, the enterprise or the company is going to have some kind of agent or something on that local box to make sure that, it's up to date, it's patched, etc. But within that sphere of, again, those kind of technical components, the developer can kind of do whatever the heck they want, and they don't have to go through a security review at the initial implementation level. Now, once they've built out their solution, and they want to move it up to a different environment, then I think absolutely the subject matter experts on security can kind of weigh in, right? And the developer should be educated up on security, but they're not going to be an SME. And so you're kind of making this trade-off as opposed to expecting them to be able to make all those security decisions in a remote environment.
I think one of the things that you are sneaking in here, and I don't say that in a pejorative way, is the idea there's control on that endpoint. Meaning, developers can have, they can have root be admins of their devices. All developers like that. They're going to pull in who knows what packages just as they're doing development. And of course, if they start to pull in packages, we'll start to conjecture that there's going to be some typo squatting, or just some legit packages, legit named, that have security issues in them. Local controls, just local endpoint security. I'm not going to list off the different acronyms because they're all too silly about what could be running on your endpoint. Hopefully, is a way just to have a degree of control for that. And maybe with this local first, you still need secrets, but secrets only to your own internal, your own personal dev system. So you're not, if there's a compromise of that endpoint due to whatever, it's isolated or mostly isolated. That feels to me like what I'm hoping exists from security, but I don't know that is any different from local first or just enabling local first, or we're just kind of agnostic to it. You go ahead and work in the cloud anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, some of these practices are the same, right? Like the blast radius is smaller on a local, environment, but other than that, I want to be kind of clear here, like that it's all about improving DX while not negatively impacting security. And you're all a security focused show, but like there's obviously legal compliance, performance, et cetera, other considerations. I'm going to lean on security because that's what your listeners care about. But the whole point is, can you use local first development to improve the developer experience and developer velocity without impacting these other things? And a crucial kind of chord on there is like that movement of code and configuration from the local environment to the next environment up, which probably isn't production in most mature environments, right? It's staging or QA or something like that. But like that is where you can make that trade-off. And so by saying, hey, everything's local, you can say, developer, do whatever the heck you want, probably within some constraints, right? Because you don't want them to be, putting asterisks in like IAM permissions or the analogous, constructs. But you give them more flexibility, and then at the same time you say, okay, once it passes through this gate, or in order to pass through this gate, then there's all these other things that we're going to want to implement. And there's been a big push to shift left, right? And you push things down to the developer for them to know, and there's tooling around that, which I think is great. That tooling can be used in the local environment so that promotion isn't a huge effort, right? You don't want to like let them do anything and then be like, okay, now to get to the next environment, you have to retrofit all this stuff. So you can use tooling in the local environment to still assist, but by giving them more control, more flexibility, you let them kind of have that control to accomplish their job, and then you kind of let them move up, right?
I do want to come back to shift left for a second, because there's a lot to unpack there. But part of this too is the idea of developers are working on their laptops or on their endpoints. They're working local. And some of what I was reading about this local first was kind of the idea that you can abstract some of the AWS services. You can just have some mocks. That leads me to a question which I enjoy the idea of testing code. Security tests, fuzzing can sneak their ways into to be on a theme of just part of testing. But how much, are there traps here in the sense of how good are those mock-ups? How good are those mocks against this, random AWS service that actually represents what the developer needs, what the behaviors they're going to see once it does go to prod?
Yeah. No, I mean, the best option is to run it locally, right? Like you run your Postgres database locally, which is the same version as the production Postgres database, right? You run the same fusion auth version locally as you do in production. Second best is a different set of trade-offs, which is because you can't go to AWS and say, hey, can I run DynamoDB locally? They're going to say, no, thanks. Then you make a trade-off around DX and you say, okay, we're going to test using essentially mocks of these databases, and you can develop against them. Now, with every mock I've ever run into, you do get drift. And so that's where this kind of cordon or this like promotion effect needs to become really, really important. So you need to have automated tests around those behaviors, and you need to make sure it doesn't get from dev to whatever the next environment is without having run through all those testing, that testing.
And part of that too is because I wanted, you mentioned too, we are security, but one of the points I wanted to try to convey throughout this interview was that security needs to pay attention to what developers are doing and just understand, how can we enable this? Are there areas where we actually should say no or try this instead, in the sense of here's a secure approach? Does part of this like local first, or have you seen developers doing more testing? Is there better testing? Is there a software quality improvement that's coming out of this versus, to be slightly dismissive, things just run faster. There's less latency, because there's a different trade-off there between quality and latency.
Sure. I mean, I will say like getting developers to do their work faster does open up opportunities for them to think about other non-functional requirements, what we used to call it back in the day, right? So if you're struggling to get your environment set up, if it's a remote environment, for example, and you're struggling to get things set up so you can just deliver the features you want, you may not have time to do other things. or they may be compressed. So there's kind of a qualitative argument there. But other than that, I would say there is some value, I think, in being able to build end-to-end integration tests against the thing that is really in production, and then be able to run and debug those tests in your local environment with the same kind of code base, even if it's not quite the same operational environment. So I think there's been benefit there, but when you bring in mocks, there's always going to be some drift, right? So it's for mocks, for that AWS mocking software that I kind of shared with you, that is much more kind of DX focused and kind of costs and developer experience focused than using a true local first solution that is compatible with what is running in production. There, I think you can kind of get some better gains at the trade off of like there are services out there, SaaS services out there, you just will never be able to run locally.
It's the idea is interesting to me. The main location where I think about doing local dev is if I'm on a plane. So I definitely get that there's some use cases out there where it's a requirement. It's not even an option. On the other side, I mean, I think over the last few years we've seen so much going to the cloud. Like, I mean, the IDE itself is in the cloud now in some cases. Like, people are doing their development through a web interface. I guess I see the DX aspect of it, but I'm sort of wondering about the cost, not necessarily so much from a business point of view, but the time of setting things up, the having to sort of keep these things going in the right direction. I'm guessing this isn't for everyone, so I'm sort of curious if you've seen patterns like you mentioned before, like a hardcore local development, not just interfacing with the SaaS. But are you seeing any more patterns around this? Who uses it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a couple of things. And I think it's totally fair to say that there has been a push towards more cloud IDEs and things like that. I've definitely seen some of that too. I think there's a little bit of a pendulum swing where people maybe get over enthusiastic about the cloud IDEs and then kind of forget that there are costs, there's latency, there's other issues, even just availability, right? Like, and as a dev, I've definitely been in situations where, how do I put this? Have you all ever been in traffic and on like the interstate and you're driving really stop and go and you get off on a local road and you know it's going to take you maybe a couple minutes longer, but you're going to take it just because you can go, like you can make movement, right? To me, sometimes dev environments are like that, right? Where it may get you there at exactly the same pace, but you'll feel better about it because you're in control of that aspect of it, as opposed to if a SaaS service goes out, right? If your cloud IDE is gone for whatever reason, even if it's only gone for a couple of minutes, you're just dead in the water. And that can be super frustrating. So that's kind of one, again, and I wish I did some looking for some studies around this, like some real kind of like peer reviewed or something that wasn't kind of a marketing website level study. And I wasn't able to find anything about hard numbers, unfortunately. But like that to me is another way to think about this, right? You're putting more control in a dev's hands. And so there are absolutely costs to it, but there's absolutely some benefits to it too.
And that was also part of where, I have no objections to just putting that enablement into the developer's hands. Obviously there's costs, like you mentioned, but from a security perspective, it's more of, what does this mean? Or, if we try to exercise some of our threat modeling questions, rather than saying, what are we building? It's more of, how are we building? Is this bad? And so far, it doesn't seem to me, other than the idea of maybe handling secrets and just what are those, basic controls you have if somebody pulls down a malicious package, NPM, a Ruby gem, etc. It doesn't sound necessarily like it's worse or bad, but it's definitely different in the sense of the cloud IDEs. You can have more control, you can have more monitoring, which you can also interpret that as some Orwellian Big Brother aspects on what is the workforce doing. But I'm also getting, I guess what I'm trying to reach for here is, it doesn't sound like you've heard other security issues or security reasons around this. Maybe something with privacy and data, but that's definitely adjacent to security.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Is this is a this is an easy give, in my opinion, for the security team, right? Again, as long as there's that promotion process to like help enable devs and build credibility with devs and build maybe credibility is the wrong term. Maybe just build a sense that we're all on the same team by giving them a level of control that like they may or may not choose to use, and a level of responsibility that encourages them to kind of have ownership over a certain aspect of the software development lifecycle, while still letting you, as the security team, have kind of clear boundaries around like, hey, this is an area where things shouldn't move without additional review or discussion.
Yeah, and I guess maybe, and to riff off some threat modeling language, where is our trust boundary? Where does it pass through? And here I'll go back to that idea of shift left, because it's definitely fallen out of favor amongst a group of InfoSec people. I think me included, just in the idea of AppSec is going to just not bother. AppSec is going to shed responsibility and just say, "Hey, developers, go do something." And the quote is something like, "It's cheap. It saves IBM. It saves 1970s IBM more money to find bugs in dev than it does in prod." And I'm jokingly saying that because the cliche we hear is based on kind of some myths. Yeah. So where is the shift? What gets shifted left onto this? Is everybody now running their own source, SAST, DAST, SCA? Can we just run that in the central CI/CD? There are certain things that maybe make more sense. What does the model here look like for that security tooling?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great question. I think that it's going to vary based on your needs and your kind of.
You can't just say it depends. That's the AppSec
that's the cop-out answer, right?
Yeah, no, that's what we do all the time.
Sorry, I hate to steal your catchphrase. But I mean, I think it does. Unfortunately, like it depends on where you are as an organization. We've steadily moved, personally at Fusion Alpha, we steadily moved more things to the local developers environment, just because that does help them catch things. But we're also a security focused company, right? And so I think that there's a little more forgiveness for our devs, a little more understanding of the reason why they might have errors show up, or things show up in their IDs, right? Like, we understand kind of the ramifications of that, and we're super careful about that kind of thing. Whereas a dev who's more of a product engineer, who's kind of just focused on jamming out features, might have a little bit less forgiveness. But I think that this is a little bit of an orthogonal discussion from local first or not, because you could have that same discussion about running DASs or SASTs in the remote environment too. So that's really kind of a cultural conversation in a way. The only thing I might add is that, again, when you give devs a bunch of control over their environment so they feel comfortable and they own it, then it might be an easier sell to say, hey, by the way, we need to have this added in too, because you're extending trust to them.
Yeah, and I think to kind of expand what I was describing too, and my reaction to shift left, is it's not the idea that you just put all of your security controls on the developer's endpoint and say, you take care of it now, it's all your responsibility. You even said this too, where are the different gates? Where are the trust boundaries? And we're going to have security controls, security checks of whatever is appropriate nature at those points. So it's not like, we shouldn't even be saying we're shifting anywhere. It's just security is pervasive, and it's just relevant at particular checkpoints of this development cycle, this CI/CD. I think so we've touched on security, we've touched on latency, touched on even just budget. What does it make more sense? I do want to go back. I did mention privacy, and there's data to deal with here, and data can be tough from a developer perspective because you can mock up some data, but there can be emergent properties or problems that come up once you get into 1 million records, 1 billion records. You cross a 4 GB boundary of a file that can be harder just to have all local. So how have you seen this impact on the data usage, or just being able to do testing around what this looks like in production?
Yeah, I mean, in my experience and kind of what I've seen, like this is not a local versus
No,
remote dev problem,
not at
right? It's a
all.
dev environment problem that you always are, you're testing with a faster computer, you're testing with a better interconnection, you are developing with a smaller database typically. I have seen situations where people will take prod dumps, scrub it of any PII or any other kind of sensitive data, and then push that down for devs to work with. That solution could work in either situation, right? Like whether you're doing local or local or remote development. So I don't think that other than, devs being aware that they need to kind of like be careful what they do on their laptop or where they leave their laptop unlocked, which
Right.
they should be doing that, whatever kind of development they're doing. I don't think there's a lot of privacy ramifications for this, or certainly like the performance, the large size that you mentioned.
Right. And I think a couple of weeks back, we talked to Niv Braun. That was a conversation around AI security, and that was AI specific or AI adjacent, AI related. And a lot of what we're describing here has nothing to do with AI other than just, in many ways, LLMs, Gen AI, are just also software. But one of the things that brought up there was data scientists, ML scientists, before everything was AI, very often can't need that original data, need potentially sensitive data sets to work with, and there are different design approaches, different architecture patterns to be able to enable that, so that you can have like individual access. And what I'm trying to get here is that, to my mind, being able to work in a cloud, I have more comfort. This could just because of observation bias or my knowledge bias. I have more comfort knowing that if I have a cloud-based IDE, I can audit who has accessed that, when has accessed that. I can audit who has had access to encryption, decryption keys as they're accessing this data. That feels like a good security story to build. Does that, if I just start to mention that, does that change your mind, or does that make you think of other things as we're talking about, like local first in the approaches?
I agree, right? Like there's data sets and there's functionality that should absolutely be built in the cloud, right? And so one thing I want to be super clear about is I think this is a nuanced story. I think that you're looking at trade-offs around, we talked about DX a lot. I think that we touched on with Mox how you can kind of have issues with environment heterogeneity or differences in environments as you kind of deploy things. And mocks are not just used locally, they're also used in remote environments because of speed or cost reasons. So, but there are absolutely times, and you just laid one out, where you have a ton of PII and it's not possible to really scrub it, or you're going to degrade it to the point where it's not going to be functionally useful to scrub it. Let's talk about a piece of AI software, right? If you're building a piece of AI software and you're building an LLM, then the tuning of that LLM or the tuning of that data is probably a good thing for remote development. If, on the other hand, you're building a web app in front of it that like takes input and you want to be able to scrub that input with a certain set of rules that isn't LLM based, that to me is a great example of local development, right? Because
it is a great example because, and two, just UX, your UI development is also just so sensitive to latency, as well as just trying to mock them up because you have to set up a bunch of sequences, click here, do this, do that. That to me absolutely sounds like, let's have that nuanced conversation and point out where it's more appropriate. So I definitely appreciate you pulling out the nuance, and it depends. You've spoken like a true AppSec person here, Dan. This is wonderful. There's one other aspect you did mention. We were just talking about LLMs just now. You did mention using that at the beginning. Let me touch on real quick as we do come near the end. how's AI helped you with SQL? Has AI been that assistant versus a replacement? Are we going to shift left all of our developers out of, off the stack and shift the AI onto it?
It's a great question, and I'm
Well, we've
really
only
glad
got
that
1 minute or so to answer. So
well, it's only a
Talk
podcast
fast.
in 2025 if it doesn't mention AI, right?
it contractually beholden. Mhm.
I think that AI will continue to be an assistant. I think right now, the hard part of software development has been for a long period of time actually really, really clearly define the problem. And AI can help with that, but I don't think it takes that essential problem away from software developers. I think you still need to really do a good job of defining the problem, understanding what humans or other entities want, and building out a solution to that. That building piece, AI can help with a lot or to some extent, but like defining the problem is really still a human issue.
And and I appreciate saying other entities. My cats are happy you mentioned that. I will also say defining the problems also sounds like threat modeling, and that's where, from an AppSec perspective, I'm still struggling to find out where AppSec where like Gen AI and LLMs contribute value to the AppSec approaches rather than just code. Because like you, I've heard of people who've been spoken fondly of it, like Copilot to name one, just coding as an assistant, but I haven't seen beyond that. And so that's just one of the things that I'm curious about. So I appreciate your answer there.
One way I use Gen AI is I use it I come up with an initial thrust of an idea, and then I ask it to poke holes in it. And so I think it's really good at that aspect of it. And so that's how I'd use it in a threat modeling standpoint. I'd be like, hey, here's my plan. What did I miss? And then you add or remove that based on your own knowledge and intelligence and experience, rather than blindly taking what it says. So it's almost like a co-editor in some ways.
I know we're running out of time, but I think this is a whole another episode. We're glad to have you back again. It sort of has me wondering. I mean, I think you've sort of touched on something which is going to have me thinking about the rest of the day. But is part of the issue there maybe also that the source content might not be there to train the LLMs? Because I don't think you go see a lot of threat modeling docs out there, or unfortunately, probably not as many design docs as we should have. But if those aren't there, then the thingy can't figure out how to predict what word comes next.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because we've seen so many like threat modeling guides say start with a data flow diagram, and it's like, oh wait, what's a data flow diagram? Where is that? So yeah, I think you're making a good point about just where that conversation can happen. But so while John's off thinking about that for a moment, Dan, I'm going to distract you with one last question. We've been asking all of our guests this year to describe AppSec in 3 words. So no other constraints, no other AI assistant is allowed here. So we do need your human perspective. What's your response here?
Sure, it's own your security. And you're doing that whether you're developing locally or in the cloud. At the end of the day, you need to own your security.
That's maybe that's going to be our I was thinking of our ASW motto being like, why do we bother? But own your security might be a little bit more marketable. We'll see.
And why do we bother is
that,
like
Dan.
four words, man. So you're kind of
yeah, exactly. That I hoisted on my own petard. But Dan, we had a nuanced discussion. You were able to point out the it depends for us. So I very much appreciate this conversation. Thanks once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Also want to thank John for joining us, and thank everybody who's been listening. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.